What else does the parliamentary system require? It needs a very, very strong bureaucracy. That is the reason why in parliamentary systems you have what is called permanent secretaries, because it's not the case here where when you have a change of administration, you change everybody up to the rec.
And this is hard evidence. Alam niyo ba na only two countries, in the period from 1962 to 1998, only two countries changed their form of government. There was Cyprus in 1970 and Sri Lanka in 1978, because it's very hard. And both of them shifted from parliamentary to presidential. That is the situation.
Ang kailangan natin, yung pong ang dami-daming mga na-mention na analysis, paralysis po, ang ating mahal na profesorang galing sa UP School of Economics, na sa sobrang daming yan, napaparalyze po sila. Pero ako lang mismo, ordinaryong OFW ako, nakikita ko ang ibang mga bansa. Ito po ang bentaha ko. Nakikita ko po ang nangyayari sa ibang bansa. Nakikita ko na pagbukas sila, mas maraming trabaho. At pag mas maraming trabaho, mas mataas ang mga sweldo.
I said that. We are talking about, and if there are any other countries who have shifted, I would like to have a list from him. So that, simple. I mean, you know, it's fact. If there are any other countries, let's see whether they've shifted from presidential to parliament, and I would love to have that additional information.
Kaya ako dito ako sa Singapore, kitang-kita ako. Sa travels ko, nakikita ako. Tayo lang ang napag-iiwanan. Bakit? Tayo lang ang may anti-FDI restrictions in the Constitution.
Pero doon, nakita ko ang presidente will appoint upwards of 5,000 positions. I'm sure, Senator Pimentel and Padilla, you know that mag-choose nga lang tayo ng 10, nahihirapan tayo. Isipin mo, 5,000 yung papakialaman mo. Every time there is a change in administration. And that's now it's not going to be. In a parliamentary system, only the head of the department, only the head of the ministry will change. And there will be continuing policy because the permanent secretaries will be the ones that will continue the policy. And it's only the direction that the head of the ministry.
Now, with respect to what I summarized the studies, and I wish that Mr. whatever his name is, tell what the studies are. There was no attempt on my part to be pro-parliament or anti-parliament. And I would like to please state what the conclusions are. Diyos ko.
Sir Orion, pakipadalan mo po kami noong
Please,
Apo,
I mean,
Sige po.
ng mga records po ninyo.
I cannot stand these assertions and etc.
I think Professor Mansod need not restate the 6 conclusion. Nasabi na po yun.
Yeah.
Okay na po.
But please make certain that these conclusions show no significant difference or significant differences. That's all. Now,
I have a rebuttal to that.
Sandali lang po.
That is a fact.
Mr. Orion, sandali lang po. Tatawagin po kayo. Please lang po.
It's not putting in an argument.
Sir Orion, please po. Makikiusap lang po sa inyo ang committee. Always address the chairman.
That is a fact. I mean, please.
Sulita Munsod, ma'am, kayo pala yan. Kanina kasi Ma'am, kamusta po? Long time no see. Opo, salamat po at
Kasi merong mga ebidensya, studies have been made, and this is hard evidence. Alam niyo ba na only two countries, in the period from 1962 to 1998, only two countries changed their form of government. There was Cyprus in 1970 and Sri Lanka in 1978, because it's very hard. And both of them shifted from parliamentary to presidential. That is the situation. Now,
I have a rebuttal to that.
sandali lang po.
That is a fact.
Mr. Orion, sandali lang po. Tatawagin po kayo. Please lang po.
It's not putting in an argument.
Sir Orion, please po. Makikiusap lang po sa inyo ang committee. Always address the chairman.
That is a fact. I mean, please. All right. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
No, I'm just trying to give the empirical findings.
Mr. Chairman,
This is
may I-
not subject to argumentation. This is a fact. If you
Mr.
don't
Chairman,
want me to
point
give
of
you
order.
facts,
Mr.
no
Chairman, point of
problem.
order. At least we should allow Ms. Monsod to finish her statement before any other resource person can butt in. That's
Yes,
what-
yes, Vice Chairman. Opo, maraming salamat po pa. Tuloy po, ma'am. Opo.
I'm trying to get back. I'm sorry. I've lost it.
Reminder lang po, Sir Orion, direct lang po sa chairman ang inyong mga sasabihin. Huwag po kayong direct sa mga resource speaker. At you have 5 minutes, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Ginoong Tagapangulo ng ating pandinig. Maraming salamat po sa oportunidad na ito. Gusto ko lang pong ma-mention kasi kanina mayroon pong mga medyo pagkakamali po ang ating resource person na galing sa UP School of Economics. Meron po siyang nasabing 2 lang po daw ang mga bansang nagbago ng kanilang form of government, pero mali po yun. Marami po ang nagbago ng kanilang form of government over the years, lalo na pag tinignan natin ano yung nangyari ever since hanggang ngayon. Marami po, totoo, marami actually ang nag-change from parliamentary na nag-presidential dahil po sila ay na-impluensyahan ng USA dahil pagkatapos ng World War II, ang USA po ang lumabas na pinakamalakas na bansa at ang dami-dami mga bansang gustong gumaya sa USA. Kaya po ang France, imbis na si Charles de Gaulle ay gumamit pa rin ng kanilang original na parliamentary system, ay nag-semi-presidential po sila. Marami po mga bansa sa Africa, napadaan nga po sila sa military dictatorship at ang kanilang military dictator ay nag-presidential system. Yung sa Zimbabwe, itong si Mugabe ay dating parliamentary system sila. Nag-presidential siya dahil mas gusto niya ng unilateral decision making, which hindi niya magagawa nung dati pa sila ay parliamentary. So, marami pong mga bansang nagkamali sa kanilang ginawa na nag-presidential sila at marami ngayon, yung mga bansang yan na nasa Africa ay nagsisisi ngayon. Kaya nga po doon sa loob ng Uganda, sa loob ng Kenya, sa loob ng Nigeria, sa Nigeria po ang lakas po ng kanilang diskusyon na gusto nilang bumalik sa pagpa-parliamentary system. At i-add po natin dyan, marami po mga bansang galing sa ex-Soviet bloc na gumagamit talaga, dumaan po sa pag-presidential. Tapos, gumamit sila, nakita nila hindi pala magandang presidential dahil masyadong dictatorial yung dating, dahil unilateral decision making. Nag-decide sila na mag-semi-presidential at later on, nag-parliamentary sila. Ito po yung, kasama po dyan yung Kyrgyzstan, kasama po dyan ang Armenia, kasama po dyan ang Georgia. Nandyan din po ang mga Latvia at Estonia na dating communist dictatorship yung dating, tapos nag-parliamentary na lang sila. Ang Moldova, dating presidential, naging parliamentary. Marami po, pati sa former Warsaw Pact. So, sasabihin lang po natin, totoo talaga na ang datos po, pag titingnan po natin ang lahat ng mga studies, actually hindi po siya 50-50 ang lumalabas eh. Parang nasa 80 or 90%. Pag naghanap tayo ng mga political literature, makikita natin 80 to 90% po ay pabor sa parliamentary. Tapos ito po mga minimension po ni Mrs. Monsod ay yung po yung mga fringe po. Fringe.
Sir Orion, address lang po natin ng chairman.
Yeah po.
Opo.
Pero na-mention ko lang po kasi na yung po yung na-mention po niya. Okay, so yun po, hindi ko po siya mismo kausap. I'm just referring to her in the third person. So, kitang-kita po na mas maganda talaga ang parliamentary system. Ang dami po nating mga studies na nandyan. Nandyan po yung sinabi ni, unang-una si Fred Riggs, sinabi talaga niya na mas maganda ang parliamentary kaysa sa presidential. Ganon din si Dr. Juan Lintz, pati si Dr. Arendt Leibhardt, pati si mismo ang pinakasikat na itong si Francis Fukuyama, paulit-ulit niyang pinagsasabihan. Meron pang isang study na mukhang nakalimutan po ng ating mahal na profesorang galing sa UP School of Economics na itong study ni na Richard McManus at Gulgin Ozkan. Who does better for the economy? Presidential or parliamentary? Overall, our results in this section establish that macroeconomic outcomes in parliamentary regimes are superior to those under presidential systems. Nakalimutan po niya yan at mukhang ginagawa ay yung mga fringe studies, yung po ay parang pinapamukhang mas importante kaysa dun sa majority na pro-parliamentary. At isa pong yung study po yung kay Person and Tabilini, nakalimutan po na dito sa study na ito, ang sinasabi daw mas mahal daw ang government spending, lumalabas na hindi na factor ng dalawang research na ito na ang mga parliamentary system na sinama sa study na yan, ay majority sa kanila ay naka-proportional representation. Natural po na kung naka-proportional representation ang sistema, mostly coalition governments po ang lumalabas sa kanila. And dahil doon, ang nangyayari, mas mahal nga talaga ang government spending dahil mas maraming mga sektor at mga grupo ang kinakailangan bigyan ng pansin. Hindi katulad nung sa mga tinatawag natin majoritarian electoral systems, which is usually what happens sa mga presidential system. Dahil po, winner take all po yan. Kumbaga, sa winner take all system, kahit hindi siya nanalo ng absolute majority, ang nangyari sa kanya, kaunti lang yung kanyang lamang sa mga rest, yung kanilang kagustuhan lang ang napapakinggan. Kaya kakaunti lang ang nagiging share ng ibang mga sektor. Kaya yun po ang nangyayari na lumalabas na so-called mas mataas ang expenditure daw ng mga gumagamit ng parliamentary system. Bunga nga dahil sa Europa, marami sa kanila gumagamit ng proportional representation. Secondly, hindi naman po masama ang government's expenditure. Lumalabas po dyan, mas ibig sabihin, pag may kinakailangan tulay, kinakailangan mga roads and bridges, mga schools, nagagawan po. Mas nakaka-reach po siya sa mas maraming tao. Hindi po ibig sabihin na porket higher ang government expenditure, masama na yun. Yun po ang isang conflationary tactic na nangyari. So, alam po natin na yung kay John Gering and Stromthacker, sinasabi po nila, moving from a presidential to a parliamentary system would lower the expected outcome of corruption. Ito po yung pinag-uusapan na mas lower ang corruption pag nag-presidential, pag nag-parliamentary. Pag presidential, mas mataas po ang corruption. Ganon din, na-mention po ni mahal na profesora from the Economics Department of UP, yung study ni na Daniel Lederman, Norman Loaiza at Rodrigo Reyes Suarez. Ganon din po sinasabi, parliamentary systems are all associated with lower corruption. May marami pong ibang mga studies na ganyan din, paulit-ulit. At alam po natin na kapag tayo po ay gumawa ng listahan ng mga worst countries versus the best countries, karamihan sa mga worst countries, regardless of which performance index ang pinag-uusapan natin, be it corruption or be it GDP per capita, be it property rights respect or etc. Human development, majority po ng nasa top performing countries doon ay laging majority parliamentary. Tapos yung mga bottom performing naka-presidential or semi-presidential. All across the board po yun. Alam na po natin yan. So, sasabihin ko rin po tungkol dun sa economic liberalization. Ako po ay bilang OFW, kitang-kita ko po yung problema. Kaya nga ako naging OFW. Dahil kakaunti lang ang trabaho sa Pilipinas. Kaya nga, pinag-aralan ko anong ginagawa ng ibang mga bansa kasi nakakahiya na. Dito sa Singapore, ang sikreto ng kanilang pagiging mayaman, dati sila mas mahirap sa atin, ay yung pagpapasok ng maraming mga foreign direct investors. So, ito po, ang pagkakamali kasi iniisip lagi na the anti-FDI restrictions in the Constitution don't really make any difference. Actually, it's all about perceptions. Gaya ng sinabi ni Imelda Nicolas, it doesn't have to be true, it just has to look like that. Itong mga anti-FDI restrictions sa Constitution, yung po yung isa sa mga unang nakikita ng mga multinational corporations. At pag nakita nila, gumawa sila ng side-by-side comparison sa kada bansa dito sa ating rehiyon at sa buong mundo, tayo po ay natatalo, tayo po ay natatanggal sa shortlist dahil tayo lang ang kaiisang bansang mayroong numerical anti-FDI restrictions in the Constitution. Para sa kanila, masama po yung dating sa kanila, parang ibig sabihin hindi nyo talaga pa kami gusto. Sa ibang bansa, wala silang nakikitang ganun. Nasa legislation lang, kung meron man sila, at usually, yung mga legislation na yun ay parang may maraming mga exception to the rule, tapos hindi kasing grabe ng 60-40. Paminsan nga, sinasabi na lang nila, may ibang country na ganyan, 30-70. Sasabihin, pwede rin pumasok sa sektor na ito, basta't bigyan nyo lang kami ng 30% dun para sa mga locals. May ganyan pa sila na parang binibigyan nila ng majority yung foreigner kasi gusto talaga nila ng capital, gusto nila ng trabaho. Yung po ang kailangan natin. Yung po ang dami-daming mga na-mention na analysis, paralysis po. Ang ating mahal na profesorang galing sa UP School of Economics. Sa sobrang daming yan, napaparalyze po sila. Pero ako lang mismo, ordinaryong OFW ako, nakikita ko ang ibang mga bansa. Ito po ang bentaha ko. Nakikita ko po ang nangyayari sa ibang bansa. Nakikita ko na pagbukas sila, mas maraming trabaho. At pag mas maraming trabaho, mas mataas ang mga sweldo. Kaya ako dito ako sa Singapore, kitang-kita ako. Sa travels ko, nakikita ako. Tayo lang ang napag-iiwanan. Bakit? Tayo lang ang may anti-FDI restrictions in the Constitution. Yung po, tapos itong mga workaround na ginagawa, they are only workarounds. Kung pakikinggan po natin ang matagal ng sinasabi ng Joint Foreign Chambers of Commerce and Industry sa Pilipinas. Ito po, sabihin si John Chambers ng American Chamber of Commerce, yung dating si Mr. Schumacher, ngayon si Lars Wittig na sa European Chamber of Commerce, o yung iba't iba, tanungin niyo po sila, paulit-ulit lang sasabihin, tanggalin ninyo ang mga restrictions sa Constitution dahil masama ang kanyang, tawag nito, ang perception po na nangyayari. So, Yun lang po, marami po sana akong papakita dito na ebidensya, no? Pero alam po, konti lang po ang oras natin. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Ginoong Tagapangulo, maraming salamat din po sa ating resource speaker na galing sa UP School of Economics dahil na at least man lang nagbigay din siya ng mga studies na pabor nga sa parliamentary system. Sana nga lang ay hindi pinamukhang equal dahil lumalabas overwhelming, gaya lang ng sabi ng aking mentor na si Professor Clarita Carlos, overwhelming and preponderance of evidence na mas maganda talaga na mag-parliamentary system kaysa sa presidential. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat, Sir Orion, sa iyong presentasyon. Ngayon po, ay baka meron pong gustong... Yes, ma'am.
My discussion about the parliamentary, when talking about Cyprus and Sri Lanka, this took place between 1962 and 1998. I said that. We are talking about, and if there are any other countries who have shifted, I would like to have a list from him. So that, simple. I mean, you know, it's fact. If there are any other countries, let's see whether they've shifted from presidential to parliament, and I would love to have that additional information. Now, with respect to what I summarized the studies, and I wish that Mr. whatever his name is, tell what the studies are. There was no attempt on my part to be pro-parliament or anti-parliament, and I would like to please state what the conclusions are. Diyos ko.
Sir Orion, pakipadalan mo po kami noong...
Please, let's,
Apo,
I mean,
Sige po.
yung mga
Studies.
records po ninyo.
I cannot stand these assertions and etc.
I think Professor Mansod need not restate the 6 conclusion. Nasabi na po yun.
Yeah.
Okay na po.
But please make certain that these conclusions show no significant difference or significant differences. That's all.
Correct. Kaya, klaro. Actually, si Mr. Dumdum nga, since we are both pro-parliamentary system, actually we should not actually worry about the inputs na the two countries mentioned, Cyprus and Sri Lanka, are not even good models for the presidential system. Itong nangyari sa Sri Lanka recently, economic collapse. Ano ang isang factors? Marami daw factors, but one factor, abuse ng isang pamilya which captured political power for 20 years din yata under a presidential form of government. So that's one of the reasons given. So gumanda pa nga sa kausa natin eh. Sa kausa ng mga pro-parliamentary, if these are this is the facts given to us, mas maganda pa, mas pabor pa sa atin because we cannot make Sri Lanka as a good model to continue with presidential form of government. And then with Cyprus, the second country mentioned, Mr. Chairman, I don't hear anything extraordinary naman about that country na na dapat gamitin din siya as model for presidential form of government. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I did not cite them as models. I simply said that of those who shifted
yeah.
government, it was from parliamentary to presidential. Now, if there are others after 1998 that shifted, I'd really like to know, and you should get the list to make sure to find out where was the shifts. That's
Or before 62. Kasi 1962 yung start niya sa'yo.
Yeah.
Before 62 and after 1998.
Before 62 and after 1998. No
Tama, ma'am.
problem. But please, let's just...
Dali lang, Sir Orion, dali lang. Ma'am. Tapos siya. Tapos.
Let's just make sure that everybody who makes statements in this forum backs up their statements by the necessary studies, unless the resource person made the study himself. I don't know.
Sir Orion.
Yes po, meron po akong maraming mga studies dito. Linagay ko po dito sa chat natin. Nandito po sa aming website, yung aming PDF library. Meron po kaming around 30 or more na studies na nakolekt namin. Nandun po sa loob ng correctphilippines.org/PDF_library.
Sir Orion, pakipadala niyo po sa amin ang lahat ng
Linagay
yan.
ko po dito sa chat po.
Link lang, link.
Opo, nasa link po ng chat dito. Siguro may taga-secretariat po, baka kaya nilang makuha para maipadala sa lahat. Nandito po siya sa chat, pinasok ko. At makikita po na mahal na profesorang galing sa UP School of Economics, makikita po niya.
Excuse me,
Maraming
Mr.
po
What is his
ang,
name?
I'm Orion Perez.
Yeah.
I'm an
I'm not-
officer.
Sir Orion, may sinasabi si ma'am.
Yeah. No. Just give me the studies. I look at them. Right? None of this, I'm looking at it from the ground. You mean to say, if you are not a poor person, you do not know what a poor person undergoes? Is that what you're trying to say? You have to be
I
from
never
the
said anything like
ground?
that, ma'am.
Unbelievable.
Wala naman po, okay naman po.
Yes, please.
Apo, Sir Orion, maraming salamat ha. Hintayin namin ha, pakipadala yung link.
Opo, nadala po na po ang link.
Okay, salamat
Next time
po.
po rin po yung mga bansa na sinabi. Kasi marami po mga bansa na
Sige, salamat ha, Sir Orion ha.
Opo.
Habang hinahanap niyo po,
Yeah.
ma'am, magkukwentuhan lang po kami ni Senator Coco Pimentel dahil napakaganda po nung topic na pinag-uusapan natin. Noon pa lang kasi nakikita mo na talaga, no, Senator, talagang meron talagang need for change. Kasi 1935 Constitution, naging 1973, tapos naging hindi bago yung pagpapalit ng konstitusyon no?
Hindi, tsaka ito lang po Mr. Chairman.
I've got
Hindi,
it.
the mere fact na merong article sa Constitution na on how to change it, how to amend it. Ganun po yun. We really need to be flexible. Flexibility is the name of the game. Ngayon, our 1987 Constitution, because of the structures nga linagay doon, naging rigid tuloy. Although theoretically, andun yung way to amend it, pero imperfectly phrased yata yun na pagdating sa usapin tuloy sa constitutional change, imbis na sa merit tayo nung substance, ano ba yung babaguhin, oras natin divert sa paano babaguhin. Ayun. So kaya kaya nga ang trap, yan ang trap. Wag tayong bumagsak sa trap na yon. Merito ng proposal sa ating i-discuss. Then pagka maganda na yung meron na tayong conclusion na maganda. At meron tayong consensus. Hindi ko sinasabing unanimity, but merong suporta ito sa majority. Saka natapos natin pag-usapan yung paano babaguhin. Kasi dinadivert tayo yung oras ubos doon sa paano, hindi na papag-usapan tuloy yung magagandang proposal. Ayusin na muna natin itong substance before procedure or process.
Maraming salamat po, Senator Pimentel. Ma'am?
Yeah.
Apo.
Yeah. Now, with respect to the form of government and corruption, ang mga studies, there are ambiguous, conflicting. There's one study where it says that the evidence supports that the theoretical finding that accountability is stronger. In other words, corruption and rent-seeking is less in presidential than in parliamentary. But that only happens when the quality of the democracy is good. If it is bad, that does not hold. Measured by the constraints on the what about other studies? Lederman in 2005 said parliamentary systems are associated with lower corruption. So one says presidential is with higher corruption, parliamentary is lower corruption. The finding supports the theory, of course. Now the form of government and democratic survivability. One study, Stepan and Skak says parliamentary democracies had a high rate of survival, more than 3 times higher than that of a presidential democracy. Presidential democracies were more than twice as likely to have pure parliamentary democracies to experience a military coup. And not one presidential regime managed to survive as a democracy for 10 consecutive years from 1980 to 1989, while 15 of the 41 parliamentary systems did. However, that study was criticized severely by another study which said that no evidence that constitutional type has had any significant bearing on the success of third world experiments in democracy. And there is no statistically significant difference between breakdown rates of presidential and parliamentary. In fact, the selection of successful parliamentary democracies was biased against Latin America in favor of Africa. So here are studies done empirically to test the experience of these forms of democracies, and this is their findings. Now, this is an empirical finding on the form of the government and government spending. Parliamentary democracies have larger government spending. The shift from parliamentary to presidential would reduce the total size of government spending by about 5% of GDP in the long run. Spending also grows much faster in parliamentary forms, and this is according to Person and Tabellini. More on government spending. A new majoritarian and presidential democracy cuts government consumption by almost 2%, while a new parliamentary democracy raises it considerably. The difference between the two forms of government is highly significant. Meaning to say, that difference is not zero. Now, with respect to, this is more empirical evidence with respect to form of government and structural reforms, defined as openness, protection of property rights. And the studies show that there is a large and significant correlation between parliamentary proportional democracy and structural reforms. There is significant, and another study says that there is significant correlation between parliamentary systems and openness. But with respect to government and economic performance, the form of government and economic performance, there is no significant effect of parliamentary system on economic performance as measured by per capita GDP, total factor productivity, and labor productivity. That is one study. And another study says a new parliamentary democracy grows 1.5% less than a new presidential democracy. These are the empirical facts that come out of studies. So, in summary, there is conflicting empirical evidence as to which form of government will lead to lower corruption. That is, there is conflicting evidence as to whether constitutional type has any significant bearing on the survival of democracies. But the evidence is pretty strong that presidential regimes have smaller spending, meaning to say government spending as a percentage of GDP than parliamentary regimes. And a parliamentary system is systematically correlated with structural policies. But a parliamentary system has no significant effect on economic performance. And the sixth takeaway here is a new presidential system grows faster than a new parliamentary system. This all come from studies. No argument on my side. These are what comes out. Right?
Okay.
Sige po.
Just a question. Were those conclusions your conclusions or conclusions of a study?
No, these are the studies.
Study. Sige.
Yes,
So,
these are.
so around six major.
My conclusion.
Okay, that you just read the study. So nakuha ba ng stenographer natin yung the name of the study? So we can.
These are several studies. These are the whole.
Several studies, but you listed the 6 conclusions.
From those several studies.
Yes, from those several studies. So thank you for.
Just summarize.
Yes, thank you for summarizing the studies for us. Yun lang yung kinaklaro ko. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat. Tapos na po kayo?
Yes.
Apo, meron lang pong sasabihin si Secretary Clarita Carlos.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to compliment my colleague, Professor Monsod. We're colleagues at the University of the Philippines. I at the Department of Political Science and Professor Monsod at the School of Economics. I complimented her because she presented empirical evidence which were done by social scientists in regard to which type of structure would enable us to reach the desired result. There is no doubt that if you will notice, some of them are conflicting results. Yes, and as it should be, as is in the nature of social science research. Mainly because social scientists, including economists who are social scientists, use different variables to test, and they also have different levels of confidence when they test. And so when Professor Monsod talks about no statistical difference, it simply means that whatever difference that you're seeing is happening by chance. But when she says that there is a very high correlate, that means that they are moving in certain kinds of direction, which in fact are related to each other. This would be for the benefit of those provide you another assumptive framework, which is that every political system is unique. While it is true that we're able to detect patterns among them, it's not always the case that countries are comparable because they're mostly not. Even social scientists, when we even investigate the same issue area, we in fact are investigating it in a different way because we are weighing the variables with different potencies, and that already changes the conceptual framework. So I agree, let us listen to the empirical evidence and let us listen to colliding evidence also pertinent to this. That's the reason why in advance of this session, Senator Padilla, remember I was telling you, let us look at the pluses and the minuses, but I still argue there will be more pluses for parliamentary systems. Thank you.
Meron po kayong gustong idagdag? Okay. Okay po. Study lang. Opo. Meron po tayong iwan muna po natin yung topic na yan. Puntahan muna po natin yung kung bakit po tayo nandito. Ito po ay patungkol sa resolusyon ng ginawa po ni Senator Win Gatchalian na ang gusto po niya ay magkaroon ng Constitutional Assembly at nagpo-propose po siya ng amendments sa restrictive economic provisions ng 1987 Constitution. Ito po ay nag-request po si Senator Win Gatchalian na gusto po niyang mahingi ang opinyon ng ating mga secretaries. Kaya po natin inimbitahan yung ating mga kalihim at tayo naman po ay sinuwerte at pinagpala na tayo po ay pinagbigyan ng ating kalihim sa national security, ang ating pong ginagalang na si Secretary Clarita Carlos. Ang tanong po ng ating senador, kung magkakaroon daw po ba ng epekto sa seguridad kung babaguhin po natin ang magkakaroon ng amenda sa konstitusyon patungkol po sa economic.
The answer is certainly yes. Mainly because when I came in as a national security advisor, I did not set aside the external threat, which is a source of our insecurity, but I stress as a political scientist the human security aspect. Therefore, whatever changes you want to make in regard to the 1987 Constitution, whether they are economic changes, whether they are political changes, etc., they will invariably link to how we enhance the security of the individual, food security, energy security, health security, security of your person. Anytime the government performs well, it redounds to the benefit of the individual, human security.
Ibig pong sabihin po ba, mahal naming kalihim, na kapag pumasok po, pinayagan natin ang mga dayuhan na magnegosyo dito, maaari po bang makaapekto ito sa seguridad ng ating bansa? Maaari po ba na sila ay maging threat sa atin?
Siguro mas marami yung hindi threat sa sa pagpumasok ang mga dayuhan, no? Kasi ito siguro yung sinusulong ng marami na alisin na yung 60-40 restriction. And ang mangyayari nito down the line is that of course the President of the Republic would like to create jobs, especially for 2 years talagang nilampaso tayo ng pandemic. So when they come in, they bring in capital, they bring in factories, manufacturing, innovation. They create jobs. You create jobs, somebody is paying for his amortization for a house. He has money to pay for the amortization of the house. Human security. You create jobs, they will put their children to school. Education. We are educators here, Professor Mansod and I. That is in fact the nerve center of economic and political development. So yes, anything that we do to liberalize the environment within which work happens, within which our daily acts of living happens, redounds to the benefit of the individual.
Ang issue po yata kasi ay patungkol po sa telecommunication. Yun po yung number 1 na nire-raise nila. Na kapag naibigay yung pag-aari sa dayuhan, baka yung ating pong, alam nyo na, dyan nag-uumpisa yung mga bagay-bagay na nakukuha nila, yung mga impormasyon. Yung po ba ay sa palagay po nyo, pwede na maging threat po yun, yung telecommunication?
Well, I've always been an iconoclast, Senator Robin, so I don't think so, with all due respect. By the way, even if we think we are in fact secure, we're not secure, I'm sure you know the capability of your telephones, and they can be intruded into and the like. Believe me, whoever gives us the stronger, faster internet, he can come from Jupiter, and I don't care. Because we're moving towards globalization. Economies are already meshed with each other. So do we care who owns what? I think I care who gives the best service. And I really don't care who you are. Whether you're a corporate person or you are a corporation, you're an individual, you're a collective, whoever gives the best service. There is no socialist way of repairing a road, is there? Is there a democratic way of repairing a road? No, you just repair the road, and it doesn't even have a label on it. I think we should be, we should be realistic about these things. Why are we putting labels on everything and putting political color? The telcos want to come here, let them come here. If the present telcos are not giving us the services that we want, we're one of the slowest telcos in the world. As I said, he can come from Saturn, and I don't care. Your Honor, Senator Padilla, just to repeat, if the senator had not invited me, I would have volunteered to come. Mainly because many, many years ago, starting in 1989, I was already part of a group composed of your father, very good friend, Nene Pimentel, Pepe Abueva, our UP president, and several others who went around the whole archipelago doing political education. Why did I say it was political education? Because we were not really advocating federal and parliamentary system. We were really laying down the groundwork for a future referendum when the population would be asked in regard to constitutional changes. And so whenever we have these interactions, I would always be the curtain raiser, the first one to introduce the subject area on federalism and parliamentary systems. So what you really need to realize is that a democracy can only work because you have informed citizenry. After all the government authorities come from the people, and I think that is enshrined in our Constitution. So anything that the people grants to the government, it can also take away. That is the reason why you have recall, you have impeachment, and the like, so that even if you had been elected by X number of votes, there are also mechanisms by which you may be not elected anymore. And that brings us to the question of why are we revising our Constitution? Well, the quick and dirty answer there, I use the term quick and dirty because it's the one we use as social scientist, Senator, to mean that we had very little time and therefore I have to truncate my responses. I know I can deliver a whole session here of my lecture, but I know that there are many other resource persons. And I hope you will invite me another time so we can continue this conversation on many, many aspects of the changes that you want undertaken. Structures are very important. Structures are really the institutions within which you envelope or you embrace individuals and groups, and the structures will define the limits to action. They will define the floor and they will define the ceiling, the bottom and the top. So that an individual, when given a particular structure, like if this were a glass, the individual knows that it can only work within the structure of the glass. Like this, cylinder. Like, you talk of the leche flan, which can be formed in different configuration. If you form it in an oblong, the milk and the sugar will only work along the edges of the oblong or whatever shape the leche flan will take. That is the nature of structure. Now, if you put warm bodies in structure, then the warm bodies will have to align within the structure. And when they so align within the structure, you invariably change their behavior. So the basic groundwork, Senator, of the changes that you want would really be this philosophical perspective that structures will result in behavior change. That's the reason why we're revising the Constitution. Because what you have seen from 1987 is that there have been a lot of things that we have done and not done, and we think that a change is in order. And the change can only come from changing the relationship among structures. And I think you hit on one of the major relationships, and that is between the executive and the legislature. Now, people seem to get confused in regard to federal and parliamentary systems. I think you mentioned that already, Senator Pimentel. When you talk of federal systems, you really talk of the relationship between the national government and the subnational units. So when you talk of a parliamentary system, you're talking about the relationship between the executive and the legislature. Okay, what is the difference between a presidential system and a parliamentary system? Siguro, konting kasaysayan. No? Nagumpisa ang parliamentary system sa tinatawag na Mother of Parliament, Great Britain. Nagkaroon sila ng bloodless revolution in 1688, where once upon a time, it was the king who declared the law. And I'm sure you remember the divine rights of kings, Senator Robin. The divine rights of kings simply declares that the kings represent God. And therefore, whatever the king says is law. But they had this glorious revolution, and so they constituted what is called the parliament. The word parliament comes from the French term parler, P-A-R-L-E-R, which means to talk. That's why parliament is a talking environment. You talk. If you zipper your mouth there, I mean, you'll be ousted in the next election because that's why no bobo can be member of parliament, by the way. I'm sorry for the use of the word, but I cannot find any other one which is appropriate. Meaning, somebody who has nothing between his ears will eventually be kicked out of the parliament because he will not be able to converse, he will not be able to exchange views, he will not be able to sustain the question hour, which will happen. I think you mentioned that a while back, because in the question hour, every member of the parliament will be asked, what have you done in agriculture? What have you done in health services? And the like, and will be made accountable for what he has or has not done. So, the beauty of this is just starting to unravel. And I wish this would be a continuing conversation, Senator, so that, this will require many, many sessions, I assure you. Because I'm just truncating my thoughts now. I'm putting them all together, and then maybe later on, I will spell them out in more detail, if not in this session, in some other sessions. All right. What is the other outstanding quality of a parliamentary system? The fundamental principle is parliament is supreme, which means whatever the parliament declares is law. Of course, if you have a dual executive, then the executive, who is a ceremonial executive, will give his or her imprimatur, but that is only pro forma. You recall Queen Elizabeth? Queen Elizabeth will dare not give the royal assent. It is given as a matter of course, because it's been taken away from the royals. They are just there for, I don't know, maybe for decoration, and for us to gossip about, and find out what dresses they're wearing. But if in a parliamentary system, you will have two executives, the one who will be there when your prime minister is kicked out of office, and when the government of the day is not there, and therefore you have a president there who will be the bridge towards the next government of the day. I will expand on this later because I have limited time. But yes, Parliament is supreme. Whatever the Parliament declares today, the next Parliament can repeal. That is how powerful the Parliament is. That is the essence, that is the vortex of the principle of Parliament is supreme. So, any law can be repealed at a later time. Do you recall Great Britain getting out of the European Union? That was a decision of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party went to the people and said, if you elect the Conservative Party members, we are going to get Britain out of the EU. And the people voted the Conservative Party members. Did they vote for Theresa May, who was the Prime Minister at the time, or Boris Johnson as Premier? No, they voted for these two people as members of Parliament. It only happened that both Theresa May and Boris Johnson were leaders of their political party. And when they constituted the majority in the Parliament, the leader became the Premier. That goes for every other parliamentary system. Whoever is the head of the majority party or a coalition of political parties becomes the Premier. And the Premier is the head of government. The President is the chief of state. All right. The other pluses of parliamentary system, and has been noted by Senator Padilla, is that there is a fusion of the executive and the legislature. You are not electing an executive because the Prime Minister will elect from among the majority party members the heads of his cabinet. If you'll notice, if you've been to Great Britain, or if you've seen it, as they are being videoed, you'll notice that the configuration is something like this, although the walkway is a little bit bigger, maybe double this. That's the reason why there is a term called crossing the aisle, isn't it? Because that is the aisle. If you cross the aisle, you actually change your political color. So let us assume the speaker is there. Whoever is seated to the right of the speaker is the government of the day. You are the premier. I am the shadow government. I am the head of the minority party. At any time you are ousted, we will exchange places. And let us say Senator Pimentel is seated there as the head of housing. Opposite from him would be Professor Monsod, who will be the housing minister even when your government is ousted. Do you see, even just looking at the parliament, in process, you already have a story there, isn't it? A lot of stories there. The concept of rightists and leftists came from that. Whoever is in the right of the speaker wants to keep the status quo. You want to be the government of the day. The one who is on the left of the speaker wants to change the status quo. We are the shadow government. I want to change you. I want to be the next premier. So, all right. What is the other beautiful part about parliamentary system? There will be no notion of term limits. If you're elected as a member of parliament, you can be elected for as long as you are alive or can continue to discourse in parliament. And you're elected by your electoral district, by the way. If you do not perform, of course, the next time you are not elected. And the best part about that is you don't even need to spend for your election because it is the political party to which you will plug your umbilical cord because it will pay for your campaign expenses, your radio and TV time. But beware, if Eric here is a member of the political party, I'll tell him, Eric, bayaran ko yung campaign expenses mo, and radio and TV time mo. Pero kwidaw ka, whenever you are in parliament, you've got to toe the party line. Which means, if we are, let us say, against abortion, dapat against abortion tayo. Yun ang party line. Kung hindi, tumiwalag ka sa party. Do you see? Party discipline. Kasi hawak ko na siya, ako nagasto sa kanya. Okay? And the other better part of this election is that we're not going through a very torturous, ano ba yun? Parang 3 months na election na naubos na yung salapi mo, hindi pa matapos yung campaign. The usual campaign period is only 2 weeks. After the parliament is dissolved, within 10 to 12 days, meron ka ng bagong parliament. Because you only go to the electoral district and you campaign on the electoral district. You are not campaigning in the whole Great Britain and Northern Ireland. You are campaigning only in your electoral district. So you don't need 3 months to do that. No term limits. There will be no, even political dynasties will be irrelevant. Why? You have political dynasties, and the empirical evidence supports me here. Orion, are you there? I'm sure you can say more about that later. But the reason why you have political dynasties is because you have term limits. You told people that ikaw ganitong taon ka lang pwedeng elect. Sabihin, ako, ganda sana ng gagawin ko. Itong kapatid ko si Eric, siya na nga ang aking sunod na mag-elect, mag-campaign. At marami na akong naitanim na mga magagandang mga proyekto. Siyempre, Eric is more likely to be elected. Not so much because we have the same surname, Carlos, but because he just followed through what I earlier started. Why will there be no political dynasties? Which is so antithetical, by the way, to democracy. Because you can only be elected by the electoral district. Never mind that your surname is the same as mine. Do you see? These are really the things that we have to think about. And I think if we're talking about strategic communication, Senator Padilla, this is how we should sell it. No term limits, no political dynasties. These are irrelevant issues in a parliamentary system. Okay, well, I don't know how much more I can go deeply on this, but do I have the time?
Opo.
Okay. All right. What else does the parliamentary system require? It needs a very, very strong bureaucracy. That is the reason why in parliamentary systems you have what is called permanent secretaries, because it's not the case here where when you have a change of administration, you change everybody up to director. Do you know, I wrote the book, by the way, Senator Padilla, on bureaucratic reform. I'll give you copies, no? Sorry sa commercial, Pero doon, nakita ko ang presidente will appoint upwards of 5,000 positions. I'm sure, Senator Pimentel and Padilla, you know that mag-Diyos nga lang tayo ng 10, nahihirapan tayo. Isipin mo, 5,000 yung papakailaman mo. Every time there is a change in administration. And that's now it's not going to be. In a parliamentary system, only the head of the department, only the head of the ministry will change. And there will be continuing policy because the permanent secretaries will be the ones that will continue the policy, and it's only the direction that the head of the ministry that will direct. Do you see the beauty of all this? The bureaucracy is king in a parliamentary system. That's why when you talk about implementation, never mind that the cabinet secretaries are changing, it's really the bureaucracy under them who will continue under the continuing rules of the game, or the rules of the civil service, or the rules of the bureaucracy. So when we adopt the parliamentary system, all these concomitants we really have to put in together. You cannot adopt them like fragmented, like with all due respect, you cannot revise a constitution piece by piece or fragmented. Let's talk of the constitution like an organism, like a human body. Meron siyang sakit sa kanyang puso, may sakit siya sa kanyang kidney. Wag lang yun ang pakailaman mo. Alaman mo lahat kasi infirm siya Kasi yung puso niya at saka yung kidney niya, meron siyang relationship, di ba? So hindi mo pwedeng galawin yung economic provisions kasi yung economic provisions, nakatukod siya sa political and social provisions. Hindi ba? So hindi siya pwedeng stand alone, papalitan mo yung economic. Tapos yung iba hindi mo siya papakailaman. When we are going to revise the Constitution, dapat omnibus ang revision mo. Kasi bawat section doon na papalitan mo, ay meron siya mga pinsan sa other sections. Mag-move lahat siya eh. They will all be moving parts. So, I'm sorry, I apologize if I go against the notion that you can in fact revise the Constitution piecemeal, you can't. Otherwise, we will be wasting our time, and some of the time, we will again revise the Constitution. And we don't like to do that. Revising the Constitution is not like suddenly, we scratch our head and let's revise the Constitution. Saligang batas po natin yan. It's the basic law of the land. It is not revised willy-nilly. It's not as if, ganito yung kapritsyo natin ngayon, we change it. No, we don't. We're changing it because we want structural change. We want structural change because we want behavior change. I think I shall conclude at that point. Thank you.
Maraming salamat po sa aming kalihim. Napakaganda po ng inyong pagpapaliwanag, lalong-lalo na po doon sa usapin na magkaharap na yung dalawa. Hindi po nagtataguan. Napakaganda po noon. Kasi yun po ang gusto ng ating mga kababayan, na gusto nila, marinig nila na sa bibig mismo nung mga pinuno nila kung ano yung mga plano nila ng harapan. Hindi po pwede na dadaan pa muna sa media, kanya-kanya munang pagalingan sa media, kanya-kanyang banatan doon, pero hindi naman sila nagkakaharap. Napakaganda po talaga noong harapan na nandiyan yung shadow government, nandoon yung ruling, sige, banatan kayo dyan. Yun po sana ang gusto natin na mangyari para yung ating mga kababayan ay hindi nangangapa. Tungkol naman po doon sa
May I immediately react to that? Okay, that's a very good point. Because during the question hour, the Prime Minister, in fact, together with government of the day, we say government of the day because at any day they can be ousted. That's the reason why we use that term. The government, in fact, can stake the life of this government on a question of policy. Policy X, for example. No? And when he stakes the life of his government on a question of policy and he does not get the vote, he will be ousted. That's one other great part about parliamentary system.
Opo, ibig niyo pong sabihin, hindi kailangan ng people power.
Oh, you don't need people. You just oust him. But, Senator, when
Kasi nagkaroon na po ng addiction yata ang Pilipino sa people power. Lagi na lang, hap na tayo sa EDSA. Marami lang tayo ng tao dyan. Sa parliamentary po, hindi na po kailangan yan.
mayroon po nung role ang rally sa ating liberal democracy. Pero wag ho natin sa kalye gawin ang ating ang mga pagbabago.
Maraming salamat po. Ngayon po, baka may gusto pong
umaabot lang naman sa kalye kasi yung protesta pag walang structure na dadaanan kasi yung grievance yung hinaing ng taong bayan eh. In a parliamentary system, nandun yung structure. May grievance kami, may hinanakit kami sa legislatura, sa parliament. Yung aming problema sa ngayon, hindi nila binibigyan ng tamang atensyon o tamang kilos. Palitan natin sa election. So, pipressure namin ang aming member of parliament to siguro a vote of no confidence para to dissolve the leadership in the parliament, mapipilitan to call an election. And then hopefully the election will reflect, makita ng election yung sentimiento ng taong bayan. Kaya importante rin na clean and honest elections dapat. So, tignan natin yung mga bayan, mga bansang yon na talagang pinatibay na nila yung electoral system nila, pinagkakatiwalaan nila ron, at saka walang insentibong mandaya ron because yung taong bayan na mismo ang susuka ka, pumandaraya ka sa eleksyon, or you will be ostracized and forever remembered. So, sanctity yun. Kasi yun ang paraan eh. Yun ang paraan ng pagbabago eh. So, yun po yun. So, para sa akin, yung parliamentary system reflects the needs of the society at the present time eh. Kasi kung hindi mo sinasagot yun, you do not belong to parliament. You will be ousted in an honest election reflecting the will of the people. Kaya yung mga patago-tago na member of the cabinet or of the government, magiging permanente na yung pagtatago nila kasi hindi na sila magiging member of the government. They will be ousted, yun nga sabi, through an election. Reflecting the will of the people. Yun po. So marami po itong marami talagang kailangan natin, pagbabagong kailangan gawin. Tapos yun na, since posible yung government of the day matanggal at any time, kailangan may matibay pa rin yung gobyernong naiwan. Kasi meron yatang possibility, Secretary, na that there's a period of time that there is no government of the day formed yet, ganon. So,
that's the reason why you have the ceremonial president to bridge over.
Yes, so that's why matibay yung bureaucracy. Kasi even without a head to give the direction for the moment, tuloy ang gobyerno, existing ang gobyerno. So, these are many features, Mr. Chairman, na pagandaan talaga natin lahat ng mga yan. So, thank you po, thank you.
Napakaganda po. Kasi kakapangyari lang po niyan sa UK na kailan lang kay Boris Johnson ba? Boris, di ba? Na nagkaroon sila ng election, nanalo nga siya, pero ang nangyari, tinatanggal siya pinag-resign siya dahil medyo may mga iskandalo siyang ginawa, COVID, pero tumutoma-toma siya, nagalit ang tao pinag-resign siya, nag-eleksyon, nanalo pa rin siya, pero nangyari, yung kanyang mga minister nag-resign. Wala siyang nagawa. Natanggal siya, palit siya.
If you will notice there, despite the fact that they ousted Boris Johnson, still the Conservative Party controlled the majority in the House of Commons. And therefore, they chose among themselves the next leader, no? But if the majority party loses its majority, we're talking arithmetic majority, no? Then they go to the country and have an election. Yeah.
Yun ang maganda Sige po, Senator.
Yun po yun. So, kung nakita natin, change is is easier to achieve under a parliamentary system. So, the party controlling the majority of the parliament made a change within. So internal, nagawa nila bago kasi yung face nila ayaw na ng tao. Let's say it's masyadong too costly for the party to maintain that face of the party. Palitan internal. Tapos sinasabi nga sa atin ni Secretary Carlos, kung kailangan silang palitan yung mismong majority, kaya rin. Because bakit papalitan? Nagbago ang sentimiento ng electorate. Hindi na kayo ang representative, the tamang representative sa panahon na ito. Maybe sa last election, totoo. Nagbago. So nagbago ang sentimiento namin, papalitan. So, ganun po. So, I mean, napakaganda if we are after a structure which will allow changes in the government to be made easier because the structures make it possible. So, napakaganda. And then kung ganyan nga, you're a member of parliament, you're the persons running the government, parati kang on your toes. So pati yung change in behavior nga sinasabi ni Secretary Carlos, on your toes, hindi yung katulad kahapon na na-atake ni Senator Villar na ang tamad nyo, ayaw nyo magtrabaho. O, gano'n. So, change of behavior on your toes parati. Di ba? Kasi kahapon, ma'am, ang excuse na nabibigay, we are a member of the board. The board, this is the board decision. We need approvals, 2 to 3 levels of approvals. Ganun yung kahapon na excuses na nabibigay. So, you are not on your toes. In effect, kung tutuusin, the whole structure is not on your toes kasi you can turo you can ipasa mo yung bola pasa mo yung blame which is also lumalabas doon sa ating Blue Ribbon kay Senator Tolentino na excuses din, pasa rin ng bola. Gusto nga niya manood daw ng Gilas, nag-investigate siya ng Blue Ribbon, nakapanood din siya ng basketball game. Kasi anong napanood niya? Puro assist, pasa bola. The blame game, the finger pointing, gano'n nangyayari. Unlike in a parliamentary system, kung mapagod na ang taong bayan, pagod na kami sa passing the ball nyo, pagod na kami sa finger pointing ninyo, palitan na lang yung party in power with the new party because they are disorganized or whatever. So, ganun po yun. So, I really want to pursue all this parliamentary system of government because it might baka mas angkop na sa panahon sa panahon na lalo na ngayon na ang bilis ng pagbabago technology, even science so economic policies iba na mga economic theories ngayon wala pa bago-bago na so we can react siguro more quickly if we adopt a parliamentary system of government. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Napakalinaw po ng pagpapaliwanag.
You know, the economic provisions, the economic restrictive, economic provisions are 7, and the resolution now talks only about public utilities, advertising, and media. Means to say that somehow or other, the other restrictive provisions have been taken care of without having to touch the Constitution. So that's what my presentation is all about. The economic provisions of the Constitution, the so-called restrictive. Amending that is neither necessary nor will amending it, bring in a flood of foreign direct investments because there are other. If you will allow me to make my presentation, I will do it. But that's the crux of my point.
Okay po, pakinggan ko lang po si Secretary Michael Castillo.
Mr. Chair, there is no problem for an equity requirement on certain sectors of the economy because that is a tool for regulation. But it doesn't have to be in the Constitution. It has to be given to Congress to determine which particular enterprise would require equity requirement. Because by keeping it in the Constitution, it limits the power of Congress to define policies and to enact policies that would in fact support economic progress. The fact that it is in the Constitution, it is a constraint there is no problem that in every enterprise, the Congress will define, okay, in this particular sector, it's 70-30. In this particular sector, it's 60-40. Then in another sector, it must be 51-49. There is nothing wrong with that. But if it is in the Constitution, I think it is limiting.
No, I am just saying that the limitations have not, the provisions have not either affected anybody. I will show you the studies that have been made, Philippine studies that have been made that show that, restrictiveness and the fact that, the resolutions talks about the Philippines is the most restrictive with respect to foreign direct investment. Hindi ba yan ang one of your whereas clauses ng resolution? Sabi ng resolution, the Philippines is the third most restrictive country in the world, and therefore that has prevented foreign direct investment from coming in. Well, I just wanted to point out that that foreign direct investment restrictiveness index that has been going on from 1997, then it started again in 2003, then it's 2006, then 2010, all the way up. That restrictiveness index shows that 1997, 2003, 2006, 2010, all the way to 2014, the most restrictive country in the world with respect to foreign direct investment was China. And China received the largest amount. So restrictiveness does not make any difference if there's a profit to be made. All right? And then, so hindi lang ng China. Let's talk about the Philippines. The Philippines became number one in 2015, I think, and 2016. Basta after 2014, China ang number one. After 2015, the Philippines became number one. And yet, if you will look at the data, the most foreign investment we have gotten 16 and 17. In 18, it started to go down, and it is now going down. So I'm saying this restrictiveness, lifting the restrictiveness is not necessary. To all intents and purposes, for all intents and purposes, the door to foreign direct investment is open. They don't come in. And why don't they come in? It's not because of restrictiveness or not. Because the Philippines is most restrictive, so much money came in. Right? So let's look at the evidence. Let's not just argue. Let's look at the evidence. Because so many people have made studies on foreign direct investment and have made their conclusions on the basis of those empirical studies, not on the basis of arguments. Let's just look at the data, the hard evidence, and it will show you.
Sir Castillo?
Well, we have to look at two sides of the coin. One question is, does it limit? The other one is, does it benefit? Now, I have never found any study that would point to a conclusion that the 60-40 requirement in our constitution actually benefited the nation in terms of economic progress and in terms of our ability to, create jobs for our people. So it has to be two ways that we have to look into.
Secretary Carlos?
May I add to the continuing conversation here? While it is true that empirical evidence provided by Professor Mansod shows that the restriction for 60-40 may not be the predictor variable for inflow of foreign direct investment, there are other variables that, in fact, prevented or were obstacles to the coming in of foreign investment, and the level of corruption is one of them. And there are studies that will support this. So I agree with my colleague here and my former student also, Eric. Robin, practically everybody in the room is my student if you've been teaching as long as I have. So yes, now we're really looking at context of empirical evidence. And that really occurs in the social science literature, even in the natural science literature, this occurs. But I think we must see the preponderance of evidence, meaning which has the most classes that will pursue the argument that we were making earlier in the session. And not only that, we have to show remarkably and arguably that in fact the studies being compared are comparable. So there's no question about empirical evidence in regard to this. So we are not saying that the 60-40 is the predictor variable. There are other predictor variables for why foreign investment comes or does not come. Thank you.
Maraming salamat po. Ma'am, magpipresent po kayo. Sige po. Opo, ma'am, makinig lang po tayo sandali sa presentation. Wag muna kayong aalis, ma'am.
I hope you don't mind, but I have a speaking engagement in another geography. So,
Gano'ng katagal po ito, ma'am? Yung... sige po, pwede po natin balikan po yan, ma'am, hanggang sa makaalis lang po si Secretary Carlos. Mag-move lang po kami ng konti, tapos pag-alis po ni Secretary Carlos, then... Opo. Papadalan ko po kayo ng copy. Opo. Ituloy lang po natin hanggang 10 minutes po. 10 minutes, pwede? Opo. Meron lang po akong mga gustong, ma'am, sana po masagot niyo po ako tungkol po dito. Yung pong, sa loob po ba, ng halimbawa po, halimbawa lang po, yung parliamentary, balik po tayo sa parliamentary kasi kanina po sinasabi po ng ating profesora na nagkaroon din po talaga ng mga issue ng korupsyon, ng hindi pag-unlad itong mga parliamentary. Ito po bang mga bansa na ito ay totoong nag-parliamentary? Ito po bang mga bansang binanggit ng ating pong profesora? O ito po yung kwentong kutsero lang din na parliamentary?
well, like democracies, parliamentary systems come in many, many permutations. So it is not as if, the parliamentary system would be like the House of Commons, because India is also parliamentary, Singapore, etc., because they have to deal with the political culture on the ground. So that means they change the configuration of the parliamentary system, but the principles that I articulated earlier, they're basic principles. In other words, you can't call yourself parliamentary if you don't have a fusion of executive, legislative. You don't have a right to oust the prime minister if he loses the majority. Fundamental principles without which you don't label yourself parliamentary. That said, again, let me say that in the course of hypothesis testing, that is, you're trying to show the relationship between certain kinds of variables which are causing certain things and having an effect, then you have an array of variables there which differ in all the 200 economies and states. And while it is true that we can present evidence after evidence, empirical evidence, many of these conclusions are colliding, or if they are moving in the same direction, are talking about different issue areas. So I'm sorry to disappoint those of us who think that the social science can declare certain things. We cannot. In fact, if you will notice, most of my statements are tentative. They are likelihoods. Because in fact, my sentences will not end in a period. My sentences will end in an ellipsis. Because that's far. Because as a scholar, I can be corrected by another empirical evidence, which has harder evidence. But still, I argue, and it's not just based on argument, compelling arguments, but this will be based on empirical evidence, which I did not prepare for in terms of titles and authors. That is still, there are more pluses and minuses. There will be less corruption in a parliamentary system rather than in a presidential system. There will be less corruption in a federal system rather than in a unitary system, because the accountability of the ministers involved is closer to the ground. It's very easy to kick out a minister. By the way, there are two kinds of responsibility, senators, your honors. Individual responsibility and collective responsibility, which means that a minister can in fact be compelled to resign on the basis of behavior which is not acceptable. You remember, Eric, the Minister of Defense Profumo? Minister of Defense Profumo, Great Britain, was sleeping with, what's her name? I forgot. Another British woman. And the British woman was sleeping with a Soviet also, defense minister. So he got kicked out. Here, you notice he got kicked out as an individual minister. But you can have collective responsibility. That's why we have the principle of you sink or swim with the government of the day. That's the reason why I said earlier that the parliamentary system in fact engenders discipline in the political party, because you are going to sink if you do not hold the party line. So the individual and collective responsibility is one other hallmark of a parliamentary system. And that one is something which I think is a plus of the parliamentary system vis-a-vis the presidential. Thank you.
Salamat po. Meron pong isang tanong pa. Di ba po ang parliamentary, iba't iba din yan? Meron din siyang parang style ng Germany, may style ng UK. Ano po kaya ang nababagay sa, halimbawa lang po, sa Pilipinas, ano pong nababagay na parliamentary sa atin?
Siguro ang maganda nating kopyahin. Total, nangangopya-ngopya tayo. Kopyahin natin ang maganda. Siguro, Senator Robin, sa Germany kasi yung constructive vote of non-confidence. Natandaan nyo si Angela Merkel stayed there for 16 years. Bakit 16 years siya? Kasi nga walang term limit, di ba? But because the CSU-CDU continued to control the Bundestag, no? For 16 years. But the only way to kick out Angela Merkel is for you to have another one to replace her. That's why it's called constructive vote of non-confidence. Hindi ka pwede mag-kick out ng Premier or Chancellor hanggang wala kang inilalagay in his or her place to be voted by the same absolute number of votes. So you will not have a constant rotation of governments of the day na, willy-nilly, you just kick out the Premier kasi ayaw mo yung pagmumukha niya or for whatever reason. No? You can only kick him out, and that is one thing that we should copy, by the way, when we draft a new constitution. Constructive vote of non-confidence.
German po, German. So doon pala tayo dapat pumunta, pare ko. Oo, Senator.
Well, Secretary Carlos mentioned the Germany. Yung party list system yata natin, we tried to copy the German model but we Philippinized it. And then, but I've heard mga reporters reporting on the German electoral system and sabi nila, we need to be rocket scientists to understand their system. So, ingat-ingat lang tayo sa German model. Siguro maganda siguro sa broad strokes, siguro sa forma, pero even yung mga reporters hindi nila maintindihan how to compute the percentages of the parties controlling the parliament, the Bundestag, because of their party list system na they needed to be rocket scientists daw to understand the system. An outsider reporting on the German model.
With all the respect, Your Honors, I beg to disagree, absolutely. Next time you invite me, I want a blackboard, and I will discuss with you in very simple terms the mixed single member district system and the PR. I have been invited 1,000 times to say something about the party list, which we really implemented in a very, very wrong way. I wasted my time, attending committee hearings. That's the reason why you have a problem right now.
Sundo po tayo!
Hindi ho, ganyan talaga yung party list system. You have distorted it. You have distorted
Pwede po bang malaman yung ibig nyong sabihin, Senator, ng Philippinize?
Ito, pagkaintindi ko kasi ng party list system, dugtong yun eh. Actually, the party list system, you are given a supplemental number of votes to actually reflect the percentage of the votes that your party got when the totality nationwide is being considered. Ganun ang pagkaintindi ko. Kunyari, if the party got 30% of the votes, and yet on the number of seats, hindi kayo 30%, dadagdagan kayo ngayon ng mga party list ninyo, listed by your party, so that the actual delegates will reflect really 30% of the votes that you got. So that's how I understand it, Secretary Carlos, but I may be mistaken.
You are very correct. But siguro para mas madaling, kailangan kong pisara next time. But you are correct. It's not only the system of government that we're changing from presidential to parliamentary, but we're also changing concomitantly the electoral system. And I would recommend very strongly, Senator Padilla, that we incorporate this, where we incorporate a single member district and a PR system called the proportional representation. I hope the next time you invite me, I would need a pisara behind me, because it's easier to explain that rather than, explaining here to you. It's better to be understood. And yes, it is not rocket science.
Maraming salamat po, Secretary.
So hanggang dito lang tayo mga tol. Maraming salamat sa panonood at patuloy na suporta. God bless you sa inyo lahat at hanggang sa muli. Paalam!